The train whistle shrieked, a mournful wail swallowed by the vast, empty plains of the Texas Panhandle. Clara Dawson gripped the worn handle of her carpetbag, her knuckles white against the faded floral print. A reflection in the grimy train window showed a woman whose sun-browned skin and determined set of her jaw spoke of a life lived under the open sky. Not in the polished parlors her mother had dreamed of for her. She tugged at the brim of her Stetson, pulling it lower to shield her eyes from the glare and from the curious glances of the few other passengers. This was it. The end of the line. She'd spent the last 3 days rehearsing this moment. The words she'd say, the defiance she'd muster. The letter from her mother had been frantic, a whirlwind of apologies and desperate measures. The family ranch was on the verge of ruin, swallowed by debt and drought. An old friend of her father's, a prosperous rancher named Silas Thornton, had offered a solution, a marriage of convenience. Clara knew him, a kindly, tired old man who smelled of tobacco and saddle soap. She'd agreed, or rather, she'd been told she'd agree for the sake of her family. But a last-minute telegram from her mother had changed everything. It was a confusing, panicked scroll asterisk sent the wrong sister. The wedding is today. I'm so sorry. Forgive me. Asterisk. Her mother had intended to send her younger, more pliable sister, Amelia. But in the chaos of packing and tearful goodbyes, she sent Clara instead. A terrible mistake. And Clara, with her fierce pride and unwillingness to be a bargaining chip, was here to call the whole thing off. She would explain to Mr. Thornton, apologize for the confusion, and return to the home she'd left, even if it meant facing a crumbling house and a disappointed family. She would make her own way. The train lurched to a halt, hissing steam. The platform was a simple wooden structure aching under the relentless sun. A handful of men in dust-covered clothes and wide-brimmed hats were waiting. Clara's eyes scanned the small crowd, looking for the stooped, silver-haired figure of Silas Thornton. She saw only one man who didn't fit the mold of a cowhand. He stood apart from the others, a tall, imposing figure leaning against a support beam. He was young, perhaps in his early 30s, with a face that was all sharp angles and sun-weathered skin. He wore a crisp, dark shirt, the kind of shirt a man wore to a wedding, not to mend a fence lawn, and a pair of leather gloves were tucked into his belt. His hat was pulled low, but she could see the hard line of his jaw and the unnerving stillness with which he observed her. Her boots hit the wooden platform with a hollow thud. The young man straightened from his post and walked toward her with a slow, confident stride that commanded attention. As he drew closer, she took in the detail as she'd missed the quiet authority in his posture, the keen intelligence in his eyes, the faint, almost smile playing on his lips. This wasn't Silas Thornton. This was someone else. He stopped a few feet away, his eyes traveling over her from the toes of her worn boots to the brim of her dusty hat. He saw the travel-weary dress, the calloused hands visible beneath the lace of her gloves, the defiant set of her shoulders. He saw very clearly that she was not what he had been expecting. Miss Dawson. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble that seemed to vibrate in the air between them. Clara squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. Yes, I'm here to see Mr. Thornton. I have a matter of great importance to discuss with him. The man's eyes flickered with something unreadable. He took a step closer, effectively blocking her path. I'm afraid that's impossible. I'm sorry. Clara's voice sharpened. The heat and the long journey had frayed her nerves. What do you mean, impossible? I have traveled for 3 days. I demand to see him. There's been a change of plans, he said, his gaze steady. Silas Thornton passed on a fortnight ago, and his son, Luke Thornton. The words hit Clara like a physical blow. Dead. The kindly, old man who was supposed to be her salvation was dead. All her carefully constructed plans to explain the mistake and politely extricate herself evaporated. This changed everything. His son. She echoed, her mind reeling. Her mother's telegram had only spoken of the mistake. They hadn't mentioned this. I'm very sorry for your loss, but I don't see what that has to do with my coming here. I was meant to see your father. There's been a terrible misunderstanding." "There's been no misunderstanding," Luke Thornton said, his voice flat and unyielding. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a letter, unfolding it slowly. The paper was thick and expensive, and it bore her father's distinctive looping handwriting. He held it out for her, but didn't let go when her fingers brushed against it. "The agreement was made between sealers and your father. It stipulated a bride would be sent today to become his wife. When he died, the bargain and the land fell to me. All of it, including the betrothed." Clara stared at the letter, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her mother's panicked note hadn't just been about sending the wrong daughter, it had been about a deadline, a clause she was now remembering. Her father, in his desperation, had signed over a parcel of land and a sizable sum of money to secure the match. If the marriage didn't happen on this day, the deal was void. The land meant to be her sister's dowry would be lost. The prospect of saving the family ranch, which had been the entire point of her reluctant agreement, was now completely gone. "You have to understand," Clara began, her voice trembling slightly in spite of herself. "I wasn't meant to be the one to come. There was a mistake. My mother, she sent the wrong daughter. I'm Clara, my sister. Amelia, she's the one who was supposed to." She trailed off, unable to finish the humiliating sentence. Luke Thornton's expression didn't change, but the faint, knowing smile on his face widened just a fraction. He had been right. The woman standing before him, with her stubborn chin and her demand to see his dead father, was not the simpering, docile bride to be the latter's had described. She was a force of nature, and he found himself intrigued. "Is that so?" he drawled, tucking the letter back into his pocket. He let his gaze drift over her again. A slow, deliberate assessment. "She sent the wrong one, did she? Well," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate register. "That's a shame. For you." Clara bristled. "For me? I fail to see how any of this is my fault." "It isn't," he agreed smoothly. "But your father's signature is on that contract, not your mother's, and the contract doesn't specify a name. It just says a bride from the Dawson family. You are a bride. You are from the Dawson family. The agreement stands. Today, you become my wife." The air seemed to leave Clara's lungs. "You can't be serious. I am a person, not a piece of livestock to be traded." "I am completely serious," he said, his eyes hardening. "You think I wanted this? A wife? I have a ranch to run, a legacy to uphold. I didn't ask for this arrangement, and I certainly didn't ask for a woman who looks at me like I'm the devil himself. But if the marriage doesn't happen today, I lose the title to half the mineral rights on a piece of land that's been in my family for generations. That's not going to happen." The town's small white church stood at the end of the dusty main street. The ride and his buggy had been silent and tense, each of them lost in their own bitter thoughts. The interior of the church was mercifully cool, lit by the soft, colored light filtering through stained glass windows depicting saints and shepherds. The only witness was the preacher, a nervous, sweaty man who seemed acutely aware that he was presiding over a ceremony whose participants looked like they might kill each other. And there was another man, leaning in the doorway to the vestry. He was older, his face a road map of wrinkles and hard living, with a salt and pepper mustache. He introduced himself, with a curt nod, as Ethan, the ranch foreman. His eyes, however, were not on Luke but on Clara, and they held a glint of cold, mistrusting appraisal that sent a shiver down her spine. The words of this ceremony washed over Clara in a daze. She heard the preacher ask if anyone had just cause, but the only sound was the whisper of the wind outside. She saw Luke's hand, steady and strong, as he slid a simple gold band onto her finger. She felt a cold, hard knot form in her stomach. She was not becoming a wife in any real sense. She was becoming a piece of property in a business transaction, a signature on a contract to save his land. She was a hostage dressed in a faded calico dress. When he took her hand, his grip was firm and commanding, and she felt a flash of pure, unadulterated resentment. When it was over, and the preacher had declared them man and wife, Luke Thornton finally looked at her. He didn't seem pleased. He didn't seem anything at all. He just looked at her, and then turned to Ethan. "See to it her things are taken to the house," he ordered. The horse ride to the ranch was a blur of heat and dust. The land was beautiful in a stark, unforgiving way, a sea of golden grass that stretched to the horizon, dotted with hardy mesquite and scrub oak. But Clara saw none of it. She was a prisoner in her own life, sentenced to a marriage she didn't want, to a man she didn't know. When the house finally came into view, it was nothing like the grand, white-columned plantation she'd half expected. It was a sprawling, two-story structure of weathered stone and dark timber, built to withstand the harsh elements. It was solid, practical, and as imposing as its master. The silence in the house was oppressive. The only sound was the ticking of a grandfather clock in the hall. He showed her to a room, a sparsely furnished chamber at the end of a long hallway. A four-poster bed dominated the space, its white linen stark against the dark, heavy furniture. It was the room of a woman who had long since passed. Silas's mother, perhaps, or his wife. She didn't ask. After he left, the door clicking shut behind him with a finality that made her jump. Clara sank onto the edge of the bed. The frustration and anger she had been holding back finally boiled over. She pulled the simple gold band from her finger and hurled it across the room. It bounced off the wall with a faint ping and rolled under the dresser. But the gesture did nothing to make her feel better. It didn't make her any less married. Life on the Thornton ranch settled into a rhythm of cold, bitter truce. Clara kept to herself, exploring the house and the dusty outbuildings. The other servants, a gaunt, silent cook and a few frightened-looking maids, treated her with a wary deference. They were clearly afraid of Ethan, whose cold gaze followed her everywhere, and they were clearly unsure of her place in the household. She was a bride, but she was not the mistress. She wasn't allowed near the stables, which she'd heard Luke mention to Ethan. She was a woman, and women didn't handle the livestock. That was just the rule of the ranch. It was his first and most stringent command for her. A ridiculous edict, considering she'd been helping her father break coals since she was 12. The Thorntons' horses, fine-blooded animals with glossy coats, were her only comfort. She'd watch them from the fence, noting the proud arch of their necks, the spring in their step. Luke, for his part, was a ghost in his own home. He would leave at dawn and return long after supper, his face drawn and exhausted. He would take his meals in his study, leaving Clara to eat alone in the cavernous dining room. Their conversations were minimal and stilted, limited to the necessary. "Good morning. Good evening. The cook will prepare whatever you like." It was a marriage in name only, a hollow charade. She realized she was a possession, part of his property, a condition of his new will. She saw it in the way he looked at her, a glance of curiosity that was quickly masked. She saw it in the way his foreman, Ethan, watched her, his eyes always carrying a hint of malice, as if she were an enemy who had infiltrated the camp. One afternoon, a week into her new life, Clara discovered a small, fenced-off garden at the back of the main house, overgrown with wild roses and mint. It was a small patch of civilization in the vast wilderness, and she latched onto it. Gardening was allowed. It was an appropriate pastime for a lady. She was on her knees, her hands caked with soil, pulling out a stub of thistle when a shadow fell over her. "What are you doing?" It was Ethan. His voice was low, barely a growl. Clara looked up, startled. I'm pulling weeds." "That's not your job," he said, his eyes narrowing to slits. He stepped closer, crowding her space. I wasn't aware I had a job, she retorted, standing up and brushing the dirt from her hands. The house is kept by the maids. The garden is my own. I was just... This land, he interrupted, his voice dripping with contempt, is not yours. This house is not yours. Nothing here is yours. You are merely a guest who has outstayed her welcome. Why don't you go back to whatever hole you crawled out of? The words were a slap. Now, you listen to me, she said, her voice low and trembling with fury. I am Mrs. Thornton. I am the mistress of this house. I will go where I please, and you will not speak to me in that tone. Mrs. Thornton, he mocked, spitting the words like a curse. You think that title means anything? It's a piece of paper. The only thing that matters on this ranch is what your husband thinks of you. And I wonder, what does he think? He stepped closer, forcing her back against the low garden wall. You're a thief, girl. A common thief who has stolen something that should never have been given away. The old man was a fool. The son is a fool, too. But I'm not. I see you for what you are. I don't know what you're talking about, she whispered, her heart pounding against her ribs. She was terrified, but she refused to show it. Don't you? He hissed. This land was mine. By rights, it was mine. Sealers Thornton was an old man whose mind was going. He should have left it to me, the man who's run this place for 20 years. Instead, he gives it to his son who's barely been home a decade. And then he sells the mineral rights off to settle a debt with your family. It's an outrage. And you, he said, jabbing a finger in her direction, you are a part of that outrage. You're a pawn, a pretty little pawn he found to legitimize his claim. So I'd be very careful where you tread. Suddenly, the air around them changed. A coldness descended. Ethan stiffened, his face going pale. He took a step back from Clara, his bluster dissolving into nervous deference. Everything all right here? Luke's voice was calm, but it held a sharp edge that could cut glass. He was standing at the entrance to the garden, a coiled stillness in his posture that made him seem even larger than he was. The sun behind him cast his face in shadow, but his eyes gleamed with a dangerous light. Just having a little chat with your wife, boss, Ethan said, a greasy smile plastered on his face. Paying my respects. Luke's gaze slid from Ethan to Clara. He saw the fear in her eyes, the defiant set of her jaw. He saw the dirt on her knees and the way she was trembling. He didn't need to hear what was said to know it wasn't a friendly conversation. He walked past Ethan without a word, his shoulder brushing the other man's in a deliberate gesture of dismissal. Get back to the main barn, Luke ordered, his voice a low, dangerous hum. We're going to talk later. Ethan opened his mouth as if to protest, but one look at Luke's face made him think better of it. He scurried away, his boots crunching on the gravel path. Luke waited until the sound of the boots had faded before he turned to Clara. His expression was unreadable. What did he say to you? Nothing I couldn't handle, Clara said, lifting her chin. But her voice, despite her best efforts, cracked. Clara. The way he said her name was different this time. It was a command, not a greeting. Tell me. She met his gaze, her own eyes blazing. He said I was a thief, that I'd stolen the land that should have been his. He said you were a fool for marrying me, and that your father was a fool for making the deal. He practically admitted he'd been trying to get control of the ranch for years, and he was very clear about what he thought of my title as your wife. Luke's jaw tightened. The vein in his temple pulsed once, twice. He knew his foreman was ambitious, a bitter man who resented taking orders from a younger man. But this was a direct challenge. It was an attack on his wife, on his authority. He won't bother you again, Luke said, his voice quiet and cold. That's not what I'm worried about, Clara snapped, the fear she'd been holding back finally turning to anger. I'm worried about this whole miserable situation. I'm trapped here, in this gilded cage. I'm not your wife, Luke. I'm just a name on a document. I'm just a way for you to keep your precious land. I know what you are, he said, his gaze hardening. You've made that perfectly clear. Then why do you care what Ethan says to me? He took a step closer, his presence overwhelming. Because for better or worse, you are my wife. You carry my name. What happens to you reflects on me. I won't have my foreman thinking he can threaten anyone in my household. Your household, she repeated bitterly. Your property. You don't see me as a person, do you? Just a piece of the deal. A means to an end. I see you, he said, his voice dropping. I see a woman who hates me for a circumstance she created. A woman who is too stubborn to see that we're in the same boat. I didn't want this marriage any more than you did. But I am trying to make the best of it. You're the one who refuses to accept it. Accept it, she cried, her voice rising. How can I accept a life that was forced on me? A life where I am not even allowed to set foot in a stable to see a horse. I grew up with horses, Luke. My father ran a ranch, too. I know more about them than most of your hired hands. But I'm just a woman to you, a possession. Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe. A grudging respect. He remembered her hands, the calluses he'd seen. He remembered the way she stood like she was used to being on the back of a horse. He dismissed it as the rough life of a frontier farmer's daughter, but now he wondered. Is that what this is about? He asked slowly. The stable. It's about everything, she said, gesturing around them. This house, this land, this marriage. It's all your rules. You decided I would marry you. You decided I would live here. You decided I was too fragile to be around a horse. What else will you decide? When I can speak, when I can breathe. Luke studied her for a long moment. The anger in her eyes was more than just frustration. It was a desperate plea for freedom, for recognition. He felt a stirring of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Guilt, perhaps, or a strange, unfamiliar pull toward the woman who was his wife. All right, he said softly. She blinked, thrown off balance by the sudden shift in his tone. All right, what? All right, he repeated. You can go to the stables, but on one condition. Clara stared at him, wary. And what's that? You ride with me, at dawn. I'll show you the ranch. The real ranch. The land I'm trying to keep. If you're going to be a part of it, you should know what it is I'm fighting for. She was speechless. An hour ago, she was a prisoner. Now, she was being offered a glimpse of the very thing she'd been dreaming of. It wasn't an apology, and it certainly wasn't a declaration of love, but it was a concession, a crack in the icy wall he'd built around himself. Dawn, she said, finally finding her voice. Dawn, he confirmed. He turned and walked away, pausing at the entrance to the garden. And Clara, he said, without looking back. Don't be late. The dawn was spectacular. The sun rose like a blazing orange queen over the endless plains, painting the sky in hues of rose and gold. A soft breeze carried the scent of dried grass and sagebrush. Luke was waiting for her at the hitching post. A magnificent black stallion settled beside a smaller dapple-gray mare. I didn't know what you preferred, he said, his voice gruff. This is Trudy. She's gentle, easy on the reins. Clara walked up to the gray mare and placed a hand on her neck. She whispered something to the horse, her voice low and soothing. Trudy nickered softly and nuzzled her shoulder. Luke watched, his eyes narrowing in surprise. It was a gesture of instinct, not training. I'll be fine, she said, mounting the horse with a fluid grace that was born of years of practice. She settled into the saddle with the comfort of a veteran, adjusting her seat without thinking. Luke felt a jolt of genuine surprise. He'd been prepared to teach her, to be patient. He hadn't been prepared for her to be an equal. They rode in silence for a while. The only sounds the steady thud of hooves and the rustle of wind. Luke guided them along a ridge that overlooked a valley, a shimmering ribbon of water winding through the bottom. "That's the creek," he said, pointing. "It's been low all summer. If we don't get rain soon, I'll have to start selling off some of the herd." Clara absorbed the information, her eyes scanning the landscape. She saw the troughs, the dry water holes. She saw the lean condition of the cattle grazing in the distance. She knew the struggle her own father was facing. She saw it mirrored here, in the worried lines around Luke's eyes. He wasn't just a tyrant holding on to his land. He was a man trying to save it. Their families weren't so different after all. "My father's land is like this," she said, her voice soft. "We lost a third of our herd last year. That's why my mother was so frantic to make this match. It was the only way to save the ranch from the bank." Luke turned to look at her, his expression unreadable. "And you came anyway. For your family." "I came because I was told to," she corrected, a hint of her old fire returning. "But yes, I would have done anything to help them, just as you would do anything for this place." "This place is all I have," he said, his voice low. "My mother died when I was young. My father was distant. The land was his passion, his only love. He gave me everything he had, but he never knew how to show it. When he died, I swore I wouldn't let it all fall apart. I'd make it thrive again. For him, for myself." They rode on, past the main herd, past the line shacks and the windmill that pumped water from the aquifer. He showed her the northern fence line, which had been broken by a storm, and the new spring he was trying to develop. He spoke with a passion she hadn't seen in him before, a passion for the land that was so familiar it ached. For the first time she saw him not as her captor, but as a man with a burden. "I wasn't always like this, you know," he said, breaking a long silence. They had stopped to let the horses drink from the creek. "Before my father died, I was in the city. I thought I was building a life for myself. Away from all of this. I thought I was free." "What changed?" Clara asked, genuinely curious. "He got sick," Luke said, his gaze distant. "He sent for me, but he was already too far gone. I came back in time to say goodbye, and to find a mountain of debt and a crumbling empire. I gave up everything to come back here. I gave up my freedom, my career. I gave up the chance to find a wife I loved." He paused, his eyes meeting hers. "And then I ended up marrying a woman who was forced on me by a contract." Clara looked down at her hands, gripping the reins. "I'm sorry," she said quietly, "that you feel you were forced." "It's not your fault," he said. "It's my father's, his sense of duty. But I'm not my father, Clara. I don't want a wife who's just a transaction." "Then why did you keep me here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "You could have let me go. You could have found a way to void the contract." "Because I didn't want to let you go," he admitted, the words falling from his lips before he could stop them. "When I saw you on that platform, so proud, so defiant, I knew I couldn't let you walk away. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I was being a fool. But I saw something in you that I hadn't seen in anyone. A fire, a strength. I didn't want a wife to serve me. I wanted a partner." Clara stared at him, her heart pounding. "A partner." "In the ranch," he said, his eyes holding hers. "In this life. I know I've been cold. I know I've been distant. But I'm offering you a choice now. Stay. Not because of a contract, but because you want to. Help me build this place into something we can be proud of. Be my partner, in every way that matters." The air around them seemed to thicken. The vast silence of the plains was broken only by the whisper of the wind, and the soft snuffle of the horses. Clara looked into his eyes and saw the fear there, the fear that he'd said too much, that he'd misjudged her. She saw the man beneath the mask, the man who had sacrificed everything for a dream. "You're offering me a partnership?" she asked, a small, incredulous smile touching her lips. "You, who wouldn't even let me near the stables." A flicker of a smile crossed his own face. "I was an idiot. I was trying to protect myself. I thought if I kept you at a distance, I wouldn't feel anything. But I was wrong. I feel everything. The silence in this house is deafening when you're not there." She reached out, her fingers brushing against his on the reins. The touch was electric. "I feel it too," she whispered. "The loneliness. I thought I was the only one." "You're not alone," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "You never were." The ride back to the house was different. The silence between them was no longer hostile but companionable, filled with a new, fragile understanding. When they reached the garden, Luke dismounted and helped her down from her horse. For a moment, his hands lingered on her waist, his eyes searching hers. "Ethan," Clara said, breaking the spell. "What are you going to do about him?" Luke's face hardened. "I've already set him straight. He's been given a choice: stay and follow my orders, or leave with his pay. He's been a loyal foreman for a long time, but his loyalty has always been to himself. If he threatens you again, he's gone. I won't have him poisoning this house." "He thinks you're a fool," Clara said softly. "But he's wrong. He doesn't see the man I see." "And what man is that?" Luke asked, his voice a low murmur. "The man who's trying to save his land," she said. "The man who's brave enough to admit he was wrong. The man who wants a partner, not a possession." Luke pulled her closer, his eyes never leaving hers. "And what about you, Mrs. Thornton? What do you want?" For the first time since she stepped off that train, Clara felt a spark of hope. She looked into his eyes and saw the future reflected there, not a prison but a partnership, not a burden but a choice. "I want this," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I want to be your partner, Luke. I want to build this place with you. But I need to know that I'm not just a name on a contract. I need to know that I matter." "You matter to me more than any piece of land," he said, his voice fierce with conviction. "I will spend the rest of my life proving that to you, if you'll let me." And as the sun climbed higher over the Texas plains, casting its golden light over the garden and the house and the land that bound them, Clara knew that she had made the right choice. She hadn't come here looking for love, but she had found something far more precious: a partner, a home, and a future worth fighting for. The wrong bride, it seemed, had been the right one all along.